Sawadee-kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is Saturday, our Pali Canon and English study group, where we study the words of the Buddha. We're using these books, Buddha Vajana, which means the words of the Buddha. There's a series of 13 of these books that students all over the world are studying and learning from, and we use this time on Saturday for students to come together in Zoom, Facebook, YouTube, Periscope, Twitch. Our podcast will eventually get this content as well, and we actually discuss the chapters in the book that the students have been reading. There's about 30 minutes to an hour of reading per week for each student, and these books are available in print format, but they're also available in PDF from our Facebook page, Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. You can go to the Files menu, and there you can download each one of these books. We're on the third volume, and these books, while they are a series, you don't necessarily need to start with number 1. You can actually start with volume number 3 and continue in this program. So if this is the first time that you've been joining us, welcome. I'm really pleased that you're here. If you've been joining us in the past for this is our 6th class for this particular program. Welcome back. Glad that you're here and hope that you enjoyed your reading over the last week. We're going to get into studying the chapters that we looked at this week, which is chapters 23 through 44. And that sounds like a lot of chapters, but some of these chapters are like a half a page or even just one page. So it's only about 30 minutes to an hour's worth of reading, depending. And as I mentioned in the past, I suggest that you kind of do that 10 or 15 minutes a day to kind of slowly drip feed the content of these teachings into the mind. Where if you sit down for 1 hour of reading at a time, it's kind of hard for the mind to remember all of that and actually go out into the world and start practicing it. So if you get in the habit of just reading like 10, maybe 15 minutes a day over the course of 3 or 4 days, then you get all your reading in for this program, and it'll be a much more enjoyable experience because you're just gradually bringing in the teachings, and it gives you 24 hours or 48 hours to kind of sit with the thoughts and sit with the teachings that the Buddha shared with you, and kind of allows you to look in the world and kind of observe how these teachings are actually true. So thank you for joining. And the way that we actually start this class is we start with meditation, because meditation is a great way to prepare the mind to learn the teachings of the Buddha. It's actually great to prepare your mind for everything, whether it's starting your day or learning in university or college or going to work or any type of things that you might be doing. It's really great to preface it with some meditation so that you'll get much more better experience out of whatever you're about to encounter. So we're about to dive in really deeply and really kind of go through and explore and investigate the Buddhist teachings here. So rather than just kind of do that with somewhat of a cluttered or muddled mind, I like to help you by starting off the class with actually meditating for 10, 15, 20 minutes or so to give you a chance to just kind of clear out the mind and prepare it for actually studying and learning the teachings. And once we're done with meditating, we'll come back and accept any questions that you have on chapters 23 to 44. So let's go ahead and take a position for meditation, whether that's seated, lying, or standing. Whatever position's comfortable for you. I'm just going to give you just very little guidance because we're just doing a short meditation, and the folks who join this class tend to be people who are a little bit further along in their journey, and you guys should be well aware of how to prepare for meditation and get your body in position, right? So elongate your spine and just close your eyes and start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. If you'd like to chant with me, you're welcome to do that. Or if you're going to place your hands in your lap or on your thighs or your knees, feel free to do that. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Bhutang งภะคะวันตังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตภะคะวะตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสภะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารณังสัมพุโนสขะโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรภูริสาธัมมาสติสัตตาตวามนุสนังพุทโธภควาติ Should be breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Just a nice, steady, consistent breath. Not forcing the breath or trying to control it. Just breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. As the mind goes to the past, the future, has thoughts, ideas, or perceptions, just cut those off, let them go. Focus the mind on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. You have nowhere to go, nothing to do. No one needs you right now. Just focus on the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธภะคะวาพุทธังภะคะวันตังอะภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตภะคะวะตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสภะคะวาอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิจาจารณังสัมมุโนสัคขะโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรภูริสาธัมมาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภคะวาติ Okay, just a short little meditation just to kind of prepare our mind for learning and receiving the Dhamma, receiving the teachings of the Buddha. So I would like to invite all of you to come out of your meditation and let me know what questions you have about the chapters that you read this week. And if you haven't read these chapters yet, it's okay. You can still participate in the class because we'll be reviewing these and be able to share them on the screen for you here in the live stream as well as in Zoom so that you'll be able to follow along with what we're studying. We studied chapter 23 through 44 this week. So any questions on those, just feed those in the comment section of Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom. And those of you in Zoom, if you have a question or follow-up question, you can electronically raise your hand, and the moderator of Manal or Basam will call on you and ensure that your question gets asked during the class. So Manal and Basam, I will turn things over to you and see what questions we have coming in.
Sure, thank you, Teacher David. If I can just, yes, the screen is up. I believe in chapter 24, meditation on every step can be liberation to Nibbana. If you can add any of your insights on canker destruction.
Yes, this was a common piece of teachings that came up over the last couple of weeks where people had a lot of questions. There were some students who didn't understand the word canker. There were some that even thought that this was the jhanas that were being discussed here. But if that student or if that person with the jhanas whatsoever, this is all about liberating the mind to enlightenment related to the fetters or the taints. If you remember, the Buddha lays out 10 fetters. These are what we call the taints, or some people call them the gankers, Because what a fetter is a fetter is something that's holding you back. It's like a ball and chain, keeping you trapped in this unenlightened mind and in this cycle of rebirth. So the fetters are like keeping you trapped. So the idea is that you need to eliminate the 10 fetters. We also call these the taints. What a taint is something that is polluted or pollution, right? So far, using this word fetter and taint, we understand that these fetters, these 10 aspects of the mind that the Buddha discovered, they are a ball and chain. They're keeping you trapped in the unenlightened mind, keeping you trapped in the cycle of rebirth. They are polluting the mind. But now we add this word canker, which I've changed in the translations that I'm using to fetter to help you understand it more. But if you understand what a canker is and how the Buddha talks about this in his teachings, then it adds some more insight to how he viewed these 10 fetters. What a canker is it's a disease. It's like an infection, right? It's like a sore, right? And what these fetters or these taints, this pollution of the mind is it's like a sore. It's like a disease in the mind. And what the Buddha is doing by using this type of language and how he goes on to explain what a canker is he's essentially relating these fetters to a disease, to an infection of the mind, individual diseases, 10 individual infections of the mind. And just like as if you had a sore or a disease or an infection on your skin, you would go seek help from a doctor and you would get medicine to remedy that. Well, if you understand these 10 fetters and the problems that they're causing in your life, then of course you would go to a doctor and you would get medicine as the solution. Well, in this scenario, the Buddha is the doctor and the medicine is his teachings. And applying that remedy, then you will eliminate this disease or this pollution or this ball and chain that's keeping you trapped in the unenlightened mind and in the cycle of rebirth. Prior to ever learning about the Buddha's teachings and being off the path to enlightenment, we were all just going around thinking that, perhaps that we were the best thing that ever met the face of the earth, with all kinds of ego, with all kinds of conceit. We were thinking that everyone else was the problem. We were thinking that every time we got mad, it was someone else's fault. We would blame other people when we got frustrated or irritated, or, if we were bored or lonely, we might blame other people for not spending time with us. But the more you learn the teachings of the Buddha, you start seeing that the real problem is your own mind. It's this craving, desire, attachment. It's this hatred, anger, ill will. It's this ignorance, delusion, unknowing of true reality. And the fetters, the 10 fetters, are more detailed descriptions of these 3 poisons or 3 unwholesome roots. So we start learning in the Buddhist teachings that we, in fact, have this pollution. We have this disease. We have this illness in the mind, essentially, that needs to be rooted out through applying the remedy. But when we're walking around in the unenlightened state, we have no idea that there's a problem. It's like walking around with an infection on the skin, or it's like walking around with a broken arm and not even realizing that it's broken, not even realizing that you have an infection of the skin, and you just walk around oblivious to this disease that's just eating away at the body. Well, these 10 fetters, if you look at them as a disease, which the Buddha is kind of connecting here in this teaching, is if you look at these 10 fetters as a disease, they're just eating away at your peacefulness. They're just eating away at your calmness, your serenity, your contentedness, your joy. They're causing all kinds of unwholesome decisions in your life. And because of these unwholesome decisions, there's unwholesome results. And this is why you struggle in life, because you're struggling to make decisions in your life through this pollution of the 10 fetters. So here he starts referring to them as cankers, as a way of helping you understand that they are essentially a disease or an infection of the mind. And he even clarifies that even more for you down here, where he starts talking about here. where he starts saying, a disease, a boil, a sting, a hurt, an affliction, as something alien, inferior, empty, not the self, right? So here he's kind of walking you through 8 reflections, 8 things that you need to kind of understand and internalize in order for you to eliminate this canker or these fetters. This first one that he talks about is, I say, so fetter destruction depends on the first reflection. And for what reason is this said? Right? This is what he talks about. He says, consider the bhikkhu who detached from sensual desires. Sensual desires is one of the fetters. Detached from evil ideas, enters and resides in the first reflection. Not the first jhana. He's not talking about the jhanas here. He's talking about moving closer and closer to enlightenment. Wherein applied and sustained thought works, which is born of solitude and is full of energy and calm, whatever occurs there of form, feeling, perception, relational formations, or consciousness, he sees wholly as impermanent objects. So here he's talking about someone who has eliminated sensual desires and someone who sees this physical form, the feelings in the mind, perceptions. Perceptions are how you view things, how you look at things externally. Relational formations are the choices or decisions that you make, and then consciousness is the mind itself. In viewing all of these as impermanent, making sure that the mind understands that with deep wisdom, seeing all of this as discontentedness, as a disease, as a boil, a sting, hurt, an affliction, as something alien, inferior, empty, and not the self. So when he's talking about when he's talking about form, feelings, perceptions, relational formations, and consciousness, this is what makes up a human being. Your physical form, the feelings, the perceptions, the choices, and the mind itself. So here he's saying you should be seeing this existence, essentially, this existence of being a human being, as discontentedness, as a disease, and eventually getting to the point where he says it's not the self. This physical body is not the self. He then goes on and he says he turns his mind away from such objects. So turning the mind away from form, feeling, perception, relational formations, consciousness, and all impermanent objects. You turn your mind away from it. You're not seeking sensual desire or sensual pleasures in certain objects. I got a new computer. I'm so happy. I got a new phone. I'm so happy. I got a new job. I'm so happy. I lost my job. I'm so sad. I'm so angry. So what he's saying here is he turns his mind away from these objects, because if the mind understands that all these objects are impermanent, then with wisdom, the mind should not have any interest in holding on to any of this stuff. Sure, you might still need a phone, and you use a phone. Sure, you might still need a computer, and you use a computer. Sure, you might decide to have a partner and kids or a job, but you turn your mind away from it, not holding it so tightly. That's what he's talking about here. Having done so having turned away from all of these impermanent objects and not holding on to them tightly, brings the mind towards the deathless element. The deathless element is enlightenment. Okay? Bassam, I'm going to mute you, buddy. The deathless element is enlightenment. Okay? Because once you attain enlightenment, you've attained the state of the deathless. Because from that point, you will never be reborn again. Therefore, you have essentially escaped death. You will never actually die. The physical body will die, but the mind has been enlightened, and now it will no longer be reborn again. So therefore, it will never experience death again. So the Buddha called this state of enlightenment the deathless, the state of the deathless. So what the Buddha is talking about here is turning away from impermanent objects and not holding on to them, seeing that as a disease, a boil, a hurt, an affliction, and bringing the mind towards enlightenment with the thought, right? With the thought, thinking that this enlightened mental state, this is peace. The enlightened mental state, this is peace. Like I always say, peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy. This is the summit, right? This is the top of the mountain. This is the ultimate goal of his path, is to attain the deathless element, to attain enlightenment. Just this, the stilling of all mind activity, through training the mind with breathing, mindfulness, meditation, and all the other teachings on this path, you still the mind. You bring the mind to full concentration, to singleness of mind. You don't have this constant chatter. So by attaining enlightenment, you're stilling all mind activity. You're still going to have thoughts. You're still going to make decisions. You're still going to enjoy. You're going to actually enjoy life a lot more. But you're stilling all that constant chatter and that constant looking back to the past, wishing things were different, or wishing you had certain things that you no longer have in the past, or no longer looking to the future and longing for the future, right? You're stilling the mind in the present moment and renouncing all rebirth. In order to get to enlightenment, two of the fetters, there's fetter 6 and 7, is you need to get to the point where you no longer desire to be reborn into a form, which is human form or animal form. And the 7th fetter is you need to eliminate the desire to be reborn into a formless realm, like heaven or the afflicted spirits or hell. These are the 3 formless realms. So for somebody to have this first reflection that the Buddha is talking about, reflecting and eliminating from the mind in order to get to this peaceful mental state, you need to be able to decide, I'm not interested in becoming a human or an animal ever again. I'm not interested in residing in heaven, in afflicted spirits, or in the hell realm. Because there are people who have a desire to be in those realms, whether it's heaven, afflicted spirit, or hell. There's people that have a desire to do that. And if you have that desire, if you have that longing with a strong eagerness, you will be reborn. Not necessarily in those realms, but there will be rebirth. So you have to get to the point where you've eliminated this 6th and 7th fetter, where you've renounced all rebirth. And the destroying of craving, right? This is what we always talk about, coming back to the Four Noble Truths: craving, desire, attachment, expectations, wants, grasping, holding, clinging. This is where the mind has longing with a strong eagerness, and it wants to hold things tightly, right? So you have to have destroyed all craving. And then what the Buddha talks about here is saying, okay, now there's calm, there's ending. This is the cessation or elimination of discontentedness. And then he says, the cool. When we talk about the 3 poisons or the 3 unwholesome roots, we also call them the 3 fires. So what you're doing is you're cooling or extinguishing these 3 fires. That's why he says the cool, right? In steadfast therein, he wins to fetter destruction, right? Destroying these fetters. If not wins to fetter destruction, just by reason of that teaching energy, that teaching sweetness, he snaps the 5 lower fetters. This is how you know he's not talking about the jhanas. The jhanas are below the 4 stages of enlightenment. Okay? In order to get to these 4 stages, which we're going to be talking about in 2 weeks' time in the group learning program on Sunday, 2 weeks from now, in order to get to these 4 stages of enlightenment, you have to eliminate the first 3 fetters to get to the first stage. You have to eliminate the first 3 and thin number 4 and 5. And then to get to the third stage, you have to eliminate the 5 lower fetters. And then to get to the highest stage, which is actually enlightenment as an arahant, you have to eliminate all 10 fetters. So here, he's talking about eliminating the 5 lower fetters. So what he's talking about here is that third stage of enlightenment. How to get to that third stage of enlightenment and having eliminated the 5 lower fetters. That third stage of enlightenment is what we call a non-returner. If you die having attained the third stage of enlightenment, you will be reborn in the heavenly realm. And you have the ability to attain enlightenment in that realm, in that birth, but it's not guaranteed. You may end up falling back down into another realm. So I'm not quite sure what he's talking about here when he says, just by reason of that teaching energy, that teaching sweetness, other than the fact that he might be talking about applying the enlightenment factor of energy and talking about literally that the teachings are so sweet, it helps you to snap these lower fetters, eliminate, destroy these 5 lower fetters. And being not subject to return from that world. Okay, so if someone's eliminated the 5 lower fetters, they're going to be reborn into the heavenly world. And that's why I put heavenly realm here, to make it clear. What he's saying is being not subject to return from that world. Well, someone who's eliminated the 5 fetters, we know is going to the heavenly realm upon their death. So that's what he's talking about here. Not being subject to return from the heavenly realm. And this is, again, how you know he's not talking about the jhanas, because he's talking about eliminating fetters and being reborn in another realm, which is the heavenly realm. And then he says, becomes completely cool there. Completely cool means eliminating all the fires, eliminating all the fetters, eliminating this desire, this eagerness, this strong desire, this longing with a strong eagerness. If someone attains this third stage of enlightenment, having eliminated the 5 lower fetters, they're reborn into the heavenly realm. And the Buddha is saying, okay, this person can become cool right there, can attain enlightenment right there. That's what he's saying. And now he goes on some more. This is a really deep teaching. Like, really have to look at it really deeply to understand it. Bhikkhus, suppose an archer or his student were to practice on a straw man or heap of clay, right? Presently, he would become a long shot, a rapid shot, a piercer of great thickness, right? So he's talking about a student who's learning how to shoot a bow and arrow that gains a lot of skill. Someone who gains a lot of skill. Someone who can do a long shot. Someone who can shoot really fast. Or someone who can shoot with a lot of force and pierce some great thickness, right? So he's talking about a student who gains a lot of skill. Even so, bhikkhus, the bhikkhu who is detached from sensual desires, that's having eliminated that one of those fetters, because those lower fetters include sensual desires. It is detached from evil ideas, enters and resides in the first reflection, wherein applied and sustained thought works, which is born of solitude and is full of energy and calm. So what he's saying is someone who's eliminated the fetter of sensual desires. What sensual desires is all about is how the mind longs through the six senses: the eyes, the nose, the tongue, the ears, the bodily contact, and the mind. These six senses. And when the mind's longing and seeking pleasant feelings through these senses, essentially the mind is obsessed with sensual desire. And what the Buddha is saying here is someone who is detached from that, someone who has eliminated sensual desires, they're also detached from evil ideas because they're no longer looking to please the self. They're no longer selfishly pursuing sensual pleasure for their own benefit, because that's what the mind is going to want to do through these six senses. Is it's going to want to long with a strong eagerness for its own sensual pleasures. And if you eliminate that selfish desire of pleasing the senses, then what the Buddha is saying is you will be detached from evil ideas, because it's no longer about pleasing you or pleasing the self, pleasing these sensual desires. Your mind is now going to no longer be pursuing this external pleasure, right? And what he eventually gets to here is wherein applied and sustained thought works, which is born of solitude, right? Someone who's secluding themselves is full of energy and calm, right? Here he's referring to the 7 factors of enlightenment for sure, because energy and tranquility are 2 of the 7 factors of enlightenment. That's what the calm is, the tranquility. I should probably change that word to tranquility. So having eliminated this constant craving, desires through the 6 senses, the mind will then be full of energy because it's no longer constantly pursuing and having this burden of pursuing this craving, and the mind will be calm because it's no longer having this longing, strong eagerness just to please the senses. Now there's more. Certainly, bhikkhus, it is said, I shall say fetter destruction depends on the first reflection, and it is for this reason that I said. Okay, so in order to destroy all of these fetters, one would need to have accomplished these things that he's talking about here. And it's kind of like just kind of one reflection where he's talking about up here that he's saying, where is it? Right here, where he talks about understanding, form, feeling, perception, volitional formation, consciousness are all impermanent. Right? You have to understand form, physical form, either the body or your phone or your computer, your books, everything around you that has any kind of physical form is impermanent. Feelings are impermanent. Perceptions are impermanent. Your choices, volitional formations, they're impermanent. So don't hold on to your choices. You choose to eat a certain dessert at a restaurant, they don't have it, no big deal. Change your decision or forego your dessert. And the mind itself, the consciousness, is impermanent. You will have had to fully, deeply understand that intellectually, but also be practicing it. And see anything impermanent, see it as discontentedness. See it as a disease, as a boil, as a sting, so forth and so on. And as we went through here, turn the mind towards enlightenment, because these impermanent objects are not going to bring permanent, pleasant feelings. That's what the mind thinks. That's why it's longing through these central, these sense faculties, these 6 sense bases. The unenlightened mind is longing through those because it thinks that's what's going to bring it permanent peacefulness. But it's not. It never does, because the mind just wants something else, and it wants something else, and it wants something else. It's only this turning the mind towards enlightenment that is going to then bring peace. In the stilling of mental activity, right? Renouncing rebirth, okay? So this is what the Buddha is sharing. And he said the same thing essentially for the second reflection, the third reflection, and the fourth reflection. He spoke similarly. So there's additional teachings that he had there. Now, he goes on and he talks about the sphere of infinite space. But let me just stop here and see if you guys have any questions on what we just talked about, because this is a very deep teaching here, going through and kind of parsing piece by piece by piece. And I would like to see if there's any questions on that before we move on to the next one.
There are a few questions from Amina on Facebook, and Basim will ask that.
Okay.
Yes, thanks, Manan. Actually, there are 3 questions from Amina on Facebook. The first one is from chapter 24, page 35. The extract is, this is a peace, this is a summit, just this, the stillness of all mind activity. The question is, in enlightenment, are there no thoughts, but instead there are an empty of the mind that brings peace? Or this passage teaching or suggesting something else? And she continues saying, from a previous class, we discussed in enlightenment that the quality of thoughts changes.
Yeah, so there's still thoughts, Amina, there's still ideas, there's still thinking, but you've eliminated any unwholesomeness in the enlightened mental state. So you're stilling of all mind activity. I might need to change this a little bit. It's really more about calming the mind, right? Down here where the Buddha uses the word calm. It's more about calming the mind and no longer having this constant chatter and this constant looking to the back in the past, this constant looking to the future. The mind is just firmly rooted in the present moment. So this, I don't think, is the best language to say the stilling of all mind activity, because there's still activity there in the mind when it's enlightened. It's just wholesome activity.
Yes. Second question is also from chapter 24, page 36. By passing wholly beyond perceptions of form, by passing away of the perceptions of sense reactions, inattentive to the perception of the many. The question is, does this mean that the path towards enlightenment is a dulling of the senses and emotions?
Yes and no. Okay, so what we tend to do in the unenlightened mind is, because of this craving, desire, attachment, these expectations, these wants, this clinging, the mind swings really far to the pleasant feelings, excited, elated, all of those things. But then it also swings to the sadness, the anger, right? The despair, right? The disappointment. That's where the mind swings to, and can get really deep into that in the unenlightened mind because it's untrained. By bringing the mind into the middle, I wouldn't consider it a dulling of the emotions or feelings. I would consider it more of a tempering or a softening of the emotions. So an enlightened mind will still experience joy, and it will still laugh, it will still enjoy things, but it will enjoy it for whatever amount of time, and then it'll bring it right back to the middle. Whereas if you've ever been around situations where either you're telling jokes or other people are telling jokes, and when those jokes are told, there's laughing, and then someone else tells a joke, or you tell a joke, and the mind kind of wants to dwell. The mind just wants to dwell in that laughter and in that pleasantness. It just wants to dwell and dwell and dwell. And then there's kind of a lull sometimes where it's kind of quiet and people don't really know what to say. And then it either becomes bored, which means neither painful nor pleasant, or someone tells another joke in order to kind of dwell in that happiness, excitement, and elation. Well, someone who's enlightened, they're still going to joke. They're still going to tease. They're still going to have fun. They're going to do it in a wholesome way. And the people are going to laugh. They're going to joke. And then they come right back to the middle, there's not going to be that dwelling or that desire, that longing to dwell in that pleasant feeling, because an enlightened mind knows that if the mind dwells there, then at some point it's going to swing back over to painful feelings. So in a previous class where the Buddha says, talking about the pleasant feelings or excitement, talking about welcoming it or inviting the pleasant feelings in. If you welcome the unpleasant feelings or you invite them in, then you're also inviting in the painful feelings. And it's not until you observe that and you notice that you become better and better at a joke is told, you laugh, you smile, you may even tell a joke yourself or whatever it is, and then boom, you bring the mind right back to the middle. There's not this longing, this wanting, this expectation that these jokes need to continue in order to continue the laughter. The enlightened mind already knows that's impermanent, so it's not going to attempt to dwell there. It's not going to welcome that and invite that in. It's just going to laugh, tell the jokes or whatever, and then bring it right back to the middle. So I consider it more of a tempering or more of a softening of the feelings, so you don't experience these extremes on either side. It kind of brings the feelings more into the middle.
Okay, the last question from Amina is from chapter 24, page 37. Thus, because as far as perception prevails, there is penetrative wisdom. Moreover, because those spheres, both the attainment of the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception, and the ending of perception and feeling. The question is, should we take this to mean that the conclusion of the chapter is that when we let go of the impermanent thoughts, feelings, and future plannings, that this creates an opening in the mind for penetrative infinite wisdom?
I think I'm following what you're saying there, Amina. The way that I would understand this chapter is that by one, and I changed this word right here to reflection rather than perception. As far as reflection prevails, so as long as you have all these reflections that the Buddha is talking about in this chapter, there is penetrative wisdom. So by understanding form, feeling, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness are impermanent, by eliminating the central desires, all these other things that he talks about in there, the mind's going to have penetrative wisdom. It's going to see that all of these things are true, all these various aspects of his teachings are true, and the mind's going to have this wisdom, right? But you would need to have had these reflections in order to get that penetrative wisdom. And then, having done that, both the attainment of the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception and the ending of perception and feeling, right? So perceptions are perceiving something that may or may not even be true. It could be true or it could be false. And I use the example a lot of times of like perceiving a neighbor is bad, so to speak. You know, that is, we could call that judgment also, but we could call it perception. Some people say what perception is it's the object, which the object is Bob, and the quality of that object. The quality is bad, right? So the mind is perceiving a certain object in a certain way. And our perceptions oftentimes are false, especially in the unenlightened mind, because we're viewing others and we're viewing situations through the unwholesome roots. We're viewing everybody else around us, and we're judging people around us, in some cases in the unenlightened mind, through our own craving, our own anger, and our own ignorance, right? And because of that, we oftentimes are making decisions off of our false perceptions. And that leads to further problems because we're not working on the truth. We're not working with the truth. And what the Buddha is saying here is that you need to essentially eliminate perceptions and no longer operate on the concept of a perception or even your feelings. Because you might feel a certain way about someone, but that is just your mind producing those feelings. Let me give you an example. Say somebody looks at me as a teacher and says, David, because you give Dhamma talks that are longer than 90 minutes and you repeat things more than one time in your talk, I have the feeling that you're talking down to me and that your ego and your arrogance, because you're talking and repeating things 2 or 3 times in your Dhamma talks, and that makes me feel like you're talking down to me. And now I think you have ego, and therefore I'm not going to be your student anymore. This is a perception. This is a judgment. And it's based on your own feeling, where if you look at the situation in its totality, that, here's this individual who's left a very lucrative career, given up a lot of things in their life, and now is sharing the teachings in a way that is helpful and beneficial to as many people around the world as he can, in a way that I don't ask for any money, I don't ask for any compensation, I don't ask for any benefit. I just do it openly and freely to all beings. And yes, I repeat things more than one time because it helps to sink it into the mind. And this is a teaching technique that the Buddha used himself, is allowing the student to soak it into the mind by repeating something more than once. This is one of the reasons why we have 45 volumes of books, is because he repeated things over and over and over again, right? So what the Buddha is saying here is by going through all these reflections and having this penetrative wisdom, that you eliminate the use of perceptions in your own feelings as a basis for your decisions in your life. Because your feelings and your perceptions in the unenlightened state are essentially mostly false. Because your feelings are being generated based on craving, desire, attachment. This is how the ego projects itself on others, and it reads that projection as coming from the other person when in fact it's coming from them. That reflection is coming back to them. So our perceptions of how we're perceiving others, if we perceive someone as bad or dishonest or untrustworthy, that's because we feel ourselves that we're untrustworthy. We lie. Because we lie, we perceive that others are lying too. Or because we have ego and we're judging somebody else as having ego, that's producing feelings in our mind that this person is talking down to me. When in fact, when you look at things clearly with penetrative wisdom, you don't allow the mind to make decisions on perceptions and feelings. You just make decisions based on the truth. And you oftentimes can't get to the truth until you've asked someone many questions. So with my wife or my son, I always acknowledge for myself, going into a certain conversation with them, that I know nothing. I know nothing about what's going on. I have no clue about what the situation is. I just walked into the house and hear my wife and my son say, for example, might be arguing. I'm not taking sides. I don't know what happened. All I'm going to do at that point is ask questions. I'm not going to allow my perception or my feelings to get involved into what's going on here. I'm just walking in and I see two people, say, arguing, for example. And of course, right away, I'm going to say, hey guys, what's going on? What's happening? Share with me what's happening. And rather than having a perception that perhaps I walk in and my wife just happens to be screaming at my son, I'm not going to take the position of my wife's wrong because she's screaming. And I'm also not going to take the position of my son's wrong. He must have done something wrong. Otherwise, his mom wouldn't be screaming at him. I'm not going to have this perception and judge the situation. I'm just going to take a neutral position and try to resolve the problem through calming it down and through listening to both sides, through asking questions. So this particular Dhamma is actually quite detailed and quite intense, and there's some pieces that you can take away from it, but there's nothing here that you can really latch onto, like the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path or the Five Precepts, things like this, and actually go out and start practicing. I don't suggest that anybody seriously sit down and try to figure out the first reflection, the second reflection, and so forth, the third and the fourth, and figure all this out. Because essentially what the Buddha is doing here is he's taking something that he already taught as the 10 fetters, something that he already taught as part of the Four Noble Truths, and taking something he taught in terms of non-self and a few other things, and he's combining it all together in a very complex way. And even me sitting here looking at this and having all the study that I've had in the Buddhist teachings, it takes a lot to wrap my mind around what he's really saying here. So all of the things that he's saying here, you will pick up in other parts of his teachings with the Three Universal Truths, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the Five Precepts, yada, 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 right on down the line. Understanding the 10 fetters, the 7 factors of enlightenment. So while we studied this, and I was interested in sharing with you because I figured you guys had questions on this, and I'm pleased to see you guys asked questions on it, I don't necessarily suggest that you guys sink your teeth into this as like a first thing to really understand on this path, because it is quite meaty and quite complex, and if you chew on this too long, you might break a tooth. Okay. I'll take other questions if you guys like about this, but this is really quite a complex teaching that the Buddha is sharing with us here.
Alan asked, related to the same chapter, I can't recall hearing you talk about arupa jhanas, spheres, before. Is there anything important about them given where we are on the path?
No, this is what I was just saying is, this is so detailed and so complex, and it comes up in other parts of his teachings, that this isn't something that I suggest you spend any time on more than what we're spending right here today. Because everything that the Buddha is talking about here, you're going to get in other parts of his Dhamma, right? This is like this really wise, super smart, intelligent teacher who's highly, highly, highly enlightened, really explaining things in a super detailed way, and you don't need to understand this in order to attain enlightenment.
There's actually one more question on chapter 24 from Nick. The first reflection, the second reflection, the third reflection, the fourth reflection, isn't this Rupa Dhatu, or level 2, which still has some form? And the sphere of infinite space, the sphere of infinite consciousness, the sphere of nothingness, the sphere of neither perception nor non-perception, the ending of perception and feeling, isn't this Arupya Dhatu, or level 3, which is formless? Can you explain the difference between these and the jhanas?
Yeah, I don't feel that any of these are referring to the jhanas, and I don't feel that any of these are referring to the stages of enlightenment either. I feel that the Buddha is kind of combining some of his other teachings into kind of a different grouping and describing them in a different way. And it's such a complex way, and we don't have teachings like this in a lot of depth. We have really good teachings on the jhanas. We have really good teachings on the 4 stages of enlightenment and so forth and so on. That is where I suggest you spend your time. These aren't the jhanas. These aren't the stages of enlightenment. Otherwise, he would have just called them that. That's not what he's talking about here at all. So I suggest you just totally leave this to the side and focus on the teachings that are part of the clear path. Because remember, this Pali Canon that we have, while it's the largest, most complete collection of the Buddhist teachings, we know it's not everything. We know it's not because of impermanence. So this teaching that we have, it might be a remnant of some really massively long teachings that the Buddha shared at some point that we just don't even have right now. So we can attain enlightenment without knowing every last little word that the Buddha said. You don't actually need to know every single last teaching that he ever uttered in order to attain enlightenment. So you've got to kind of know and have confidence when I say you can set this aside and it won't affect your path to enlightenment at all. That I feel that this is probably just a grouping, a regrouping of a way of explaining things that he's already explained in other parts of his teachings that we do have clear teachings on. And this might just be kind of a remnant of something that we don't actually have and we don't actually understand in a lot of depth. Now, someday you might run across the teacher that does understand this in a lot of detail. Maybe the people who wrote this book and put this book together do understand it. But for me, I don't understand it as deep in a way that is practicable, that you could go out and sit down, contemplate these reflections, and produce some kind of results. I see a way to accomplish all these same exact things through other teachings that we have very clearly. What I think is helpful here is looking at how the Buddha is creating an analogy between a canker sore, a boil, a disease, this hurt, and his teachings. Because if we have a disease or an infection of the skin and you see that, that's going to impact the skin and the flesh and the bones, you're going to go get medicine from a doctor. Well, if you start associating these fetters, these taints, these pollutions of the mind as a canker sore, as a disease in the mind, and you start seeing that with penetrative wisdom, that, this ego is getting in the way of better things for my life. This sensual desires are getting in the way. This ill will is getting in the way. This is a disease. This is a canker. Now let me go to the doctor, the Buddha. Let me get the medicine, his teachings, and let me apply that remedy and now create better health in the mind. So that's one of the ways you can use this Dhamma, is this analogy of a physical illness, associating it to these fetters and these taints, and looking at the Buddha's teachings as medicine and the Buddha as a doctor. And that's really helpful, and there's people who look at that in the same way. So these individual reflections and these individual spheres, they're not going to lead to anything that would create more enlightenment in the mind, more so than what we've already got on kind of the clear path of the three universal truths, the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the five precepts, and so forth and so on.
We move on to chapter 26.
Okay.
I have a question. Any significance to the term Aryan? It has been used in several places. So Aryan truth, Aryan disciple. Nick also has a question related to the same word. Teacher, I was wondering who the Aryan is referred to in a couple of chapters. Is it a people or is it a specific person?
It's a people. It's considered to be kind of noble during the Buddha's lifetime to be of this class. So that's why I changed the word in the translation that I give as noble. And if you look in the book that I wrote, Developing a Life Practice, if you look all the way back in the glossary, I believe I put back there, maybe I did, maybe I didn't. Yes, the very first word in the glossary is Aryan. So here's what I gave you. Even though it doesn't really show up in my teachings, it shows up in the Buddhist teachings. Aryan is a term that was used as a designation by Iranian people. So Indo-Iranian people. The word was used by the Indic people of the Vedic period in India as an ethnic label for themselves and to refer to the noble class as well as the geographic region known as, I can't pronounce that word, where Indo-Aryan culture is based. So essentially it refers to a noble class. So that's why, since most people don't know that, I just translated it to noble so that you guys would know that. But these books that have the translations from the Pali translators, they're using the actual translations of Aryan. But what I'm doing in my translations is I'm taking it to a more common language that the average person can understand without having to do a whole lot of cross-referencing. So you can think of that word Aryan as noble.
We move on to chapter 29. Judith asks a question.
Mm-hmm. And I would like to just add one thing there, Manal, and for Nick and others, is remember the Buddha's time frame. When he started teaching, there were the Brahmins who were 15% of the upper caste system that were designated as the only ones that could communicate with God. And then there was 85% of the population that were believing they had to pay these Brahmin because they were of a lower class and they weren't able to actually communicate with the gods. So everything that the Buddha is doing here is he's casting his teachings as this noble truth, right? This upper class, this designated class, and then essentially saying whether you're a low class or an upper class person, by learning these noble truths, these Aryan truths, you are becoming a noble person. So he's totally flipping this caste system upside down and showing these lower caste people that it doesn't matter where you're born that determines if you're noble or not. What it matters is the wisdom that's in the mind. And even if you were born in a lower caste, you can learn this penetrative wisdom and you can independently see the truth for yourself. In this, you will be then noble. You will thus be of this upper class, essentially, without being in the upper class. You will be this noble person because now you're not killing, you're not stealing, you're not having sexual misconduct, you're not lying, you're not taking substances that cause heedlessness, you're speaking with right speech, right action, you've got concentration and awareness of mind, you're applying effort and energy, the mind is calm and tranquil, it's focused, it's clear, you have deep, profound memory in this enlightened mental state. So even if somebody is of low class, by learning these noble truths or these Aryan truths, they are then essentially a more noble person, even having been born in a lower caste. So he's kind of flipping this upside down and showing people that it's not where you're born, it's the knowledge and wisdom that you have in the mind that determines whether you're noble or not where you were born.
Thank you for that clarification.
Yeah, and one of the ways that I might connect that to kind of what we understand of today, there's certain cities, like in America, like in Detroit, for example. If you're born on one side of the railroad tracks, you're considered to be of low class, of poverty stricken. If you're born on the other side of the railroad tracks, you're considered to be upper class and have a better life for yourself. And what the Buddha is basically saying is it doesn't matter what side of the railroad tracks you're born on, you can be a noble person based on the wisdom that you have in your mind. It's not about where you were born. So that might help you understand it in today's terms.
Yes. Judith asked a question on chapter 29.
Mm-hmm.
She asks, when it says a Buddha, and this is capital B in the textbook, would this be a mistranslation?
Where are we on chapter 29?
It's when he refers to Kevada.
Oh, are you thinking that that means a Buddha? Is that what you're saying? That
She
Kevada
asked,
is a mistranslation of Buddha?
well, she asked, when it says a Buddha, would this be a mistranslation?
Where does it say a Buddha? I don't recall that there was somewhere referring to a Buddha here.
In the book on page 94, it reads, and further, Kevada, suppose that a Tathagata is born into the world, one who has won the truth, an Arahat, a fully awakened one, abounding in wisdom and goodness, happy, who knows all worlds, unsurpassed as a guide to mortals, willing to be led, a teacher for gods and men, a blessed one, a Buddha.
I'm going to have to find that, Mano. I don't see it right off. You said page number 94 in the printed book?
Correct.
Okay. Is it on the upper part or the lower part?
It's on the upper part.
Oh. It'd help if I was on the right page. Okay. So I see where that is. Now, what's the question?
The question she asks is, would this be a mistranslation? Quotes a Buddha.
No. What he's saying here is, and further, suppose a Tathagata. A Tathagata is him, is a Buddha. A Tathagata is one who sees the truth, one who has discovered the truth. And what he's saying here is to this person, suppose a Tathagata, a Buddha, is born into the world, one who has won the truth, right? That's what a Tathagata is, one who has discovered the truth and is enlightened on their own. An Arahant, a fully awakened one, abounding in wisdom and goodness, joyful, who knows all worlds, who knows all the realms, unsurpassed as a guide to humans willing to be led. So students who are willing to be led, a Tathagata is a unsurpassed trainer or guide to those who choose to be led. A teacher for gods and humans. This is interesting because oftentimes people think that the Buddha denied the existence of God, but right here you can see in his own words he's actually referencing himself as a teacher to the gods, that he's actually teaching gods, right? Because gods are still in the cycle of rebirth too, right? So he's teaching them in humans. A perfectly enlightened one, a Buddha. He's basically referring to himself here, and he's describing what a Tathagata or a Buddha is. So that's not a mistranslation.
She has a follow-up comment. So I was confused whether there's one Buddha or there can be more.
He is the Buddha from his lifetime, and he predicted that another Buddha will appear in the world 2,500 years after his death. And he's just referring to himself in multiple ways. He's referring to himself as a Tathagata, which is one who knows the truth, who is an Arahant, fully enlightened, fully awakened one, abounding. Now he's talking about certain qualities, right? Wisdom, goodness, joyful. He knows all the worlds, unsurpassed guide to humans, willing to be led, a teacher of gods and human. And now he describes himself again. He's a perfectly enlightened one, a Buddha. And the reason why we call him perfectly enlightened is because he doesn't have any teachers. His mind wasn't tainted with the teachings of other, that he's trying to sort his way through, and he's kind of holding on to things that are maybe true and maybe not. A perfectly enlightened one is one who doesn't use any teachers or any guides whatsoever. He's only attained this mental state through his own understanding, his own discovering of the truth. And that's why he's a perfectly enlightened one, and thus a Buddha. That's what a Buddha is, a perfectly enlightened one, one who doesn't have any teachers whatsoever, who during their lifetime, they teach many, many people to attain enlightenment, and then they leave the teachings at their death in a condition that many, many people after them will attain enlightenment once they die. So these are kind of like the three main criteria, but there's other criteria that makes a Buddha as well. But we refer to that person as a perfectly enlightened one, a Buddha. And during his lifetime, he would have been the only Buddha, and we haven't seen another Buddha since his lifetime that the entire world currently knows about. So, but there is another Buddha that this particular Buddha, the Gotama Buddha, he predicted that there would be another Buddha 2,500 years after his death.
We have another question on chapter 29 from Nick. Teacher, can you give a modern day example of a mystic wonder or wanderer? Also, what would be a manifestation wonder? Is this talking about things like how to manifest things, as in the famous book, The Secret?
Yeah, so what the Buddha's talking about here is like special abilities. As somebody awakens, as the mind awakens, the Buddha's talking about this mystic wonder, and he's talking about a wonder of manifestation. And these are special abilities, and these are just some of them. There's other special abilities that as the mind awakens, these kind of things start to happen. And he gives a couple of examples here. And eventually, once he gets to the end of the examples, he basically says, I don't do these things. So right here, this first paragraph, he's explaining what a mystic wonder is. And then by the time he gets to the end of that paragraph, he says, because I perceive danger in practice of mystic wonders that I disagree and refrain from, I am reluctant to perform. So you will see this in this chapter, and you will see this in this particular book. This is book 12, I believe. This particular book goes into all the things that the Buddha talks about in terms of psychic abilities, palm reading, fortune telling, all these different things that the Buddha says are lowly arts. These are things that as you become more and more enlightened, you get these special abilities, but he tells people don't do this, don't perform these, and definitely don't perform them for benefit or gain or financial gain. So here is just one piece of Dhamma aside from this entire book that goes into some of the special abilities that one can acquire through this path to enlightenment. Because as you eliminate these burdens, these craving, anger, and ignorance in the mind, and the mind becomes unburdened, it becomes more enlightened, you start getting these special abilities like psychic abilities and fortune telling. You can be able to tell the future when other people can't. He goes into some pretty amazing ones that are kind of like borderline miracle almost, the way that I would view them, where he talks about someone who has mystic power from one being multiform to being one. So like taking multiple beings and combining them into one and becoming one being. And then he talks about being visible and then becoming invisible. Like someone can go from being seen as visible to now I'm invisible. I've never seen that before, but apparently the Buddha did, and the Buddha knew about it, and the Buddha was probably able to do it too, but he just chose not to do it. And he goes through multiple examples here where he talks about even, flying through the air. He talks about here at one point, and going through solid objects, walking on water. He talks about walking on water without the water dividing. This is something we heard that Jesus Christ did, right? So it's not just Jesus Christ that we've got stories about this happening, but the Buddha says this is possible too, without optical illusion, right? One is able to travel through the air cross-legged, right? So that's that. And then down here, your question, Nick, I think it was Nick, is wonders of manifestation. let's see what he's got here. That a brother can make manifest the heart and feelings. Okay, so this is somebody who can manifest feelings in other people. So he says, suppose in this case, whatever that name is, that a brother can make manifest the heart in the feelings, the reasonings and the thought of other beings, right? So this is like you yourself have the power. You have this wonder of manifestation where you can make other people feel certain things based on your power, right? That's a pretty strong power if you have that power, right? So and so is in your mind. So this is where he's just basically finishing up that thought, where he's saying that you can implant thoughts essentially in other people's minds. You can read people's minds. This is where he's talking about reading people's minds down here. Because as you awaken closer and closer to enlightenment, you may develop the special ability to be able to know what's in other people's minds without them even telling you, right? That's what he's talking about there. And he goes through some other stuff, but eventually, once again, he gets to the point where he says, I perceive danger in the practice of the wonder of manifestation that I disagree and refrain from, and I am reluctant to perform. So this is something that I experienced too, that I experienced being able to read other people's minds, but you shouldn't hold on to that and you shouldn't perform it because there's a certain amount of showmanship, there's a certain amount of pride. You're not looking to acquire special abilities through attaining enlightenment and then showing off these special abilities because they can be destructive if you do these kind of things. And the Buddha is saying, hey, I don't perform that. I don't do that. I'm reluctant to perform it. And then eventually what he gets into in paragraph 3 is he talks about the wonder of education. This is how he talks about how he observes wisdom in the world. And he uses these paragraphs to talk about purifying the mind through penetrative wisdom and being able to understand his teachings. And he goes through and he talks about these. And then eventually, when he gets down to the bottom of all of this, and he talks about good conduct as well, as part of this wonder of education, he talks about good conduct in the next couple of paragraphs. And then eventually, when he gets down to the end, he talks about how these are the 3 wonders that he's understood and realized for himself, that he knows that these 3 things are available. You can perform these magical, mystical things, and you can also gain all this wisdom, right? And he says, he's made these known to others. He's let other people know that these things are available. And I also think I remember seeing one other thing. One moment. No, maybe I was mistaken. Okay. Yeah. I thought what I had remembered him saying, and he may have, but I'm just not finding it. But I kind of remember him saying that in this wonder of education, that's what he does. These other 2 wonders, these mystical, magical things, he's reluctant to perform those. But this wonder of education, I remember him saying somewhere in here that that's what he does, is he trains his mind essentially to gain this wisdom and perform this good conduct. I have a feeling it's in here somewhere. But anyway, we know that's what the Buddha did. He was that's compassionate kind of creatures. This is called the wonder of education. With his mind serene, Yeah, I have a feeling it's in here somewhere. I'm just not finding it right now. But we know that's what the Buddha did. He didn't do all these mystical, magical miracles and keep proving to people over and over that he was a Buddha through performing these miracles. He just focused on sharing the teachings to help liberate people's minds. He wasn't interested in showing off all these amazing powers. He was more interested in this wonder of education. And the vast majority of this teaching is focused on that.
We don't have any further questions for the remaining chapters. However, I forgot to see Judith actually had a question on chapter 23.
Okay. Let's go back to 23. This is the Eightfold Path.
She asks if you could talk a little bit about right aspiration and aiming at renunciation in this modern world where we need to fulfill certain needs in order to sustain life. Thank you.
Okay, let me see. I think that right aspiration is being translated as, I'm translating as right intention, I think. Let me just check. Yes. Okay. So what you're seeing in the book as right aspiration, this is, the Buddhist teachings are impermanent. There's many people that do translations, and you'll see this second step of the Eightfold Path translated as right aspiration. You'll see it translated as right thought, right thinking, and I translate it as right intention, and a lot of other people translate it as right intention. So this deals with the renunciation, the intention of non-ill will, the intention of harmlessness. This is what we covered in the group learning program this past Sunday, is the intention of renunciation is the giving up, the letting go, right? Letting things go. The intention of non-ill will is to eliminate this this bitterness, this harshness, this eliminating this interest in seeing harm come to others, and then eventually the intention of harmlessness and not causing harm to other beings, because if we have the intention to cause harm to others, then harm's going to come to us. So in order to attain enlightenment and fully train the mind on this path to enlightenment, you would have to cultivate in the mind this intention of harmlessness, of not being interested to harm any other beings through such things as your speech, your actions, your livelihood, and so forth and so on, which gets into the next part of the Eightfold Path, which is the moral conduct. So if you don't have that yet, where you do have ill will, or other words for ill will are hatred, anger, right? If you have hatred, anger, ill will towards others, then you haven't fully cultivated in the mind this intention of non-ill will. And you've got to cultivate that towards all beings. Well, how do you do that? Loving kindness meditation. That's the antidote for ill will. And in order to fully practice this right intention, you would need to eliminate ill will and practice harmlessness. Otherwise, you're going to just keep causing harm in the world through your that originates in the mind, but then it's going to come through your speech, actions, and livelihood. You're just going to keep causing harm in the world through your speech, actions, and livelihood, and that harm is just going to keep coming back to you over and over and over again. So you've got to get to a point where you're no longer interested in harming others, and not just the thought of that, which is here in right intention, but you've got to follow that up with your speech, your actions, and your livelihood. Because there's plenty of people in the world that will say, oh, I have loving kindness for everyone. I love all beings. But then when they go out on the parking lot, they're laying on the horn just because somebody's taking a little bit longer to get in or out of a parking spot, right? So someone might say verbally, oh, I love you, I love you, I love you. But then they'll turn their back on you and do some action that is completely opposite of that love. So one of the things that you've got to do in order to get to enlightenment is ensure that your intentions, your speech, and your actions are all in sync. But your speech and your actions wouldn't be able to become purified which is what this path is doing, is purifying, training you to purify your speech and your actions. You wouldn't be able to purify your speech and your actions if your intentions were coming from a place of ill will. If your thinking or your thought, your aspirations, your intentions are coming from a place of harmfulness, of ill will, of hatred, of anger, if your thoughts are coming from and originating from a mind with thoughts, thinking, aspirations, intentions of harming, then your speech and your actions, and thus your livelihood as well, are going to also be tainted. So in order to purify this mind, which would include purifying your intentions or your aspirations, so that eventually that works its way further and further into the mind, so that when you have this thought of harmlessness or these intentions of harmlessness, now when you speak, you're not interested in harming others through your speech, your actions, or your livelihood. So you've got to purify your intentions here. That's what the Buddha is getting to. Can you reread that question again, Manal, for me? I just want to make sure I got all the different pieces of it.
Sure. If you could talk a little bit about right aspiration and aiming at renunciation in this modern world where we need to fulfill certain needs in order to sustain life.
Okay, yeah, I thought there was more there. It's really focused on renunciation. Okay, so renunciation and giving up, it's not necessarily the giving up of objects or giving up of things, right? Because like having a phone, like it's not required that everyone have a phone, but pretty much in order to live life, you kind of have to have one of these things in life. You could live and sustain your life without a phone, but in order to interact in the world, you really do kind of need some way to communicate with people. So what the Buddha is talking here about renunciation is he's not necessarily talking about giving up all your possessions, giving up all your relationships, walking away from all worldly things, although some of his language kind of talks about that because that's what they were doing. In order to put on those orange robes and shave their head, they really were stepping away from all worldly things. But the way that you can look at this today with this renunciation is it's being willing to let go of the craving, desire, attachment in the mind. Because there's nothing wrong with having a phone. There's nothing wrong with having a life partner. There's nothing wrong with having children. That isn't, just having these objects isn't what causes the discontentedness in the mind. That phone is incapable of causing me any harm whatsoever. But it's when the mind has craving, desire, attachment, this mental longing with a strong eagerness, that we are causing our own discontentedness. So you've got to learn how to peacefully coexist with things and use it as you need it, and base your decisions off of what you need in life. And I've talked about this before in talks where at one time in my life, as soon as the brand new phone came out, I had to hurry up and buy the next iPhone. I think now they're on iPhone 12. You have to hurry up and buy the next iPhone. Well, that gets really expensive. And, there's a lot of longing for that. And there's a lot of work that I had to do in order to be able to afford the brand new iPhone every year when it came out. Well, that's not what you really need. That's what my mind wanted at one point because of craving, desire, attachment. That's what my mind wanted. And it drove me to making a lot of decisions that resulted in harmful things for myself and others. But what living this life of renunciation is exactly what you're talking about, Judith, is looking at your needs. What do you really need in this life versus what do you want? So now, even though at one point in my life I had an iPhone 9 or 10, now I've decided just to go with an iPhone 6. And even though all the other ones have come out, I just stick with this one and I don't need anything else because this one serves me just fine. And this is all I need. Now, at some point, if this breaks or it becomes too slow or I'm not able to operate and do the things that I need to do, I may upgrade, but I doubt I'll buy the brand new one. I'll probably go buy a used iPhone 9 or an iPhone 10 or something like that, because I'm not interested in using funds in order to buy the latest, greatest one. I'm just interested in kind of meeting my needs, whatever those are. So you don't have to give up your house and your dog and your this and your that. You don't have to do those things. But what you have to do is you have to give up what's in the mind that's holding on to these things, because that's what the real problem is. It's not the object itself. It's the craving, desire, attachment that's in the mind holding on to these things. And that's what you have to have renunciation for, being willing to give that up.
It appears there are no more questions.
Okay, so let me just stop all the technology from sharing the screen and come back to a full screen. All right, so thank you all for joining for today's class. This particular book, Walking the Buddha's Way, I feel like was one of the more challenging ones, along with the Sotapanna. This second and third book, I feel, are some of the more challenging ones, especially if you were only working with the translations in the book. There's a lot of really old language here. So there's a lot of challenges in reading and understanding the teachings here. If you would like to go back to what I did and how I changed the translations, out of all the books that I've done now, I'm on the 6th one, I had to spend the most time on this one. And this was actually the thinnest book out of all of them. It was only 44 chapters. But I ended up spending the most time on this one because the language was so archaic. So if you struggled with this one or you had a hard time with it, it's okay. That's normal. I had a really hard time with it too. I had to spend a lot of time digging into this one and really considering word after word after word after word about what made sense in order to bring these teachings to be more alive. So if you would like to explore this one some more, go back and download this version that I created that has some updated translations, and that will help you to really glean more out of this book. If you're either going to do that or you're not do that, what we're going to be doing next week is we're going to be into this book. This is volume 4. It's called Easy Paths for Attaining Nibbana. Now, this is a little bit more like the book that we studied, the very first one, which I think a lot of people were able to go through pretty easily, following Dhamma trails. This book was fairly straightforward. And this book is as well, Easy Paths for Attaining Nibbana. But I just want to give you a heads up on something. I feel like this title is a little bit misleading. There's no such thing as an easy path for attaining Nibbana. Attaining Nibbana is a lot of work. Attaining enlightenment is a lot of work. It's not easy, but it's also not difficult. If you have someone to guide you, if you take your time, if you approach this with gradual training, little by little, you can gradually work towards the goal. So even though this book is titled Easy Paths, don't feel like you're going to jump into this and get some like quick reference sheet of how to get to enlightenment by the end of the month, because that's not what this book is about. I don't know why they named it Easy Paths for Attaining Nibbana, unless it's just the fact that it deals a lot with how to attain Nibbana. But there's no such thing as an easy path. There is no shortcut to Nibbana, is what I'm saying. So next week we're going to be diving into chapter 1 through 18. So you can be studying this if you like. And just before class, I uploaded my version of this book to our Facebook group. So you can go to the file section and you can download this version of the book in PDF form if you either are reading the printed and you want a second look at some other translations, or if you don't have these books at all because you can't afford to have them printed and sent to you, then you can get them free in our Facebook group by just going to the Files menu. So we're going to be in chapter 1 through 18 next week. So study that and let me know what questions you have as you go. And we'll also have a class on this next week, just like we're doing now. So thank you all for joining. I appreciate that you've spent the time this week to study this book, study the teachings, and putting them into practice. I appreciate that you're continuing to progress and learn. Each one of these books as we go takes on more and more of a different theme. The 5th book is all about the natural law of karma. The 6th book is all about meditation. And as we progress here, we're getting into more and more of the teachings of the Buddha, and you're going to see a full array of all of his different teachings extracted from different aspects of his teachings. So it's going to be really interesting for you as you progress and start seeing all the different flavors of his teachings. So if this particular book, number 3, was a little bit challenging, don't worry about it. Put it in the past, or if you would like to go back and see what I did for translations, you can look at those, and those might be a little bit more helpful for you. But otherwise, just move on to volume 4 so that you can now start looking at some other teachings as well. Tomorrow in our group learning program on Sunday, we're going to be talking about the moral conduct of the Eightfold Path, which is right speech, right action, and right livelihood. We're going to be breaking this down into a lot of detail and just focusing on those 3 steps. And then this Wednesday coming up, we're going to be doing breathing mindfulness meditation. We're going to be doing a much longer session in the group learning program than we have been doing recently. And then, like I mentioned, next Saturday, we're going to be in chapters 1 through 18 of this book. So enjoy your week. Let me know what questions you have. Feel free to reach out for any guidance that you might need. And I'll see you either Sunday, Wednesday, or Saturday. Have a lovely day. Sawadee krap. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.